Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, today we're unpacking something absolutely massive. If you're an educator, an admin, or even just a super invested parent, you already know the drill. The way we assess and grade students is basically the backbone of the entire learning experience. So let's jump right in and explore the highly anticipated DepEd Order No. 015 series of 2026. Make no mistake, this isn't just some minor policy tweak. It's a complete, ground-up overhaul of the grading systems and classroom assessments for the K-12 program. But hey, before we get into the nitty-gritty mechanics, we've got to talk about the elephant in the room. Are our grades actually reflecting what a student has learned? We've all been there, right? Totally frustrated. We've watched students move up a grade without foundational skills. We've all wrestled with crazy grade inflation. And I'm sure some of you have had to awkwardly explain to a parent why an 82 is vastly different from an 83. We've leaned so heavily on transmutation tables, and honestly, they sometimes just hide the real learning gaps. It's a huge systemic issue. So how do we fix it? Well, the Department of Education is officially calling this out. In the policy's own rationale, it says, and I quote, "This order addresses persistent challenges in grading and recognition practices, including grade inflation, over-reliance on transmutation, inconsistent promotion standards, and the limited use of assessment evidence to inform instruction." You get the idea. They're tackling the credibility and transparency issues head on. The biggest takeaway here is that these massive changes aren't just random. They are a direct, totally necessary response to make sure a kid's progress is reported fairly and accurately. So, to help you digest the whole shebang, we're going to break this down into 4 clear chunks. First, redefining classroom assessments. Second, the new rules for AI. Third, the revamped grading systems. And fourth, rethinking interventions and awards. All right, let's jump straight into part 1, redefining classroom assessments. The policy draws a really stark line here between 2 types of assessment. Think of it like this. On one side, you've got formative assessment. This isn't about crunching numbers for a grade. It's a continuous, everyday process to monitor learning, spot gaps, and give feedback right then and there. On the flip side, there's summative assessment. That's the big one. It evaluates achievement at specific points, like the end of a unit, and gives us the actual evidence that gets recorded for a grade. Basically, formative is for learning, and summative is of learning. And this is where it gets really interesting. The policy actually outlines a specific framework for these formative checks. They call it the ESRU model. That stands for elicit, student response, recognize, and use. So you elicit a response with a prompt, the student answers, you recognize and catch any misconceptions, and then boom, you use that info to instantly adjust your teaching. The policy literally frames teachers as detectives of learning in real time. I absolutely love that phrasing. Which brings us to this super crucial mandate. Formative assessment has to be embedded in daily instruction. It is no longer this separate, clunky activity you just do on a Friday afternoon. It's got to be a natural, breathing part of every single lesson. Every time you ask a question, check a draft, or do a quick peer review, you are gathering vital data to decide what to teach next. Moving right along to part 2, and this is a hot topic: rules for AI and assessment. So, the department is finally formally recognizing that artificial intelligence is here to stay, but it's governed by 5 really strict ethical principles. First, authenticity. Outputs still need to reflect the learner's actual brain power. Second, alignment with learning intent. Third, transparency. If you use AI, you gotta declare it. No exceptions. Fourth is equity in access, making sure kids without fancy tech aren't left behind. And fifth, data privacy. You absolutely cannot upload personally identifiable student data to an AI platform, period. Let's make this super practical. The order gives us crystal clear boundaries for learners. For things like independent recall or supervised exams, AI is totally prohibited. No way. Using it there is flat-out academic misconduct. But it does have limited uses for stuff like grammar checks or initial brainstorming. Where it actually gets fascinating is the guided category. For older kids, specifically key stages 3 and 4, AI is actually recommended for complex problem solving. As long as the student documents how they used it and can prove it's their final reasoning, it's a go. Now, what about for you, the teachers? Well, you are strictly prohibited from letting AI determine final grades. It cannot bypass your professional human judgment. However, under limited and guided uses, you absolutely can use AI as a co-pilot. You can use it to draft assessment prompts, translate competencies into rubrics, generate alternate tests, or even help draft up some feedback. You just have to review and validate everything it spits out.
All right, let's roll into part 3, the new grading systems. This is a big one.
First up is the descriptive grading system. And guys, this is a massive philosophical shift for Key Stage 1. That's kindergarten through grade 3. Instead of pulling your hair out over whether a kid deserves an 82 or an 85, you'll be using a qualitative approach. We're talking performance descriptors like consistently demonstrates or beginning to demonstrate alongside actual narrative feedback. The whole goal is to focus purely on foundational learning without the heavy, stressful pressure of a number grade.
So, when does this actually hit your classroom? Here's the phased rollout timeline. For school year 2026 to 2027, kindergarten and grade 1 will kick things off with the descriptive system. The next year, grade 2 joins the club. And by school year 2028 to 2029, the entire K through 3 block will be completely numeric grade free. Okay, but what about the older kids in key stages 2 through 4? Enter the zero-based grading system. This literally means the computed initial grade is exactly what gets reported. No transmutation, no grade conversion. That mathematical safety net that magically bumped a 70 up to a 75? Yeah, that era is ending. By the 2027 to 2028 school year, 75 is the hard minimum passing grade, based strictly on raw computed scores. When you look at how the weights are distributed for grades 4 through 10, written works are sitting around 20%, and term exams take up about 20 to 30%. But look at the performance tasks. Making up 50 to 60% of a learner's grade, these are now the absolute primary evidence of learning. Students actually have to show they can apply what they know in a real, authentic context. It's a real game changer. Finally, let's wrap things up with part 4, rethinking interventions and awards. The overarching philosophy here is pretty simple. We need to stop punishing failure. Promotion and intervention have to be non-punitive. If a kid is struggling, you can't just wait until the end of the year to fail them. Remedial interventions are now required to start as early as week 5 of the term, right after that first summative test. It's all about catching them early, with timely, integrated support before they fall too far behind. And speaking of massive cultural shifts, let's talk about honors. For Key Stage 1, again, K through 3, there will be absolutely no academic awards conferred. None. Zero. To stop the toxic early competition and putting labels on tiny kids, progress is going to be communicated purely through that descriptive feedback we talked about earlier. It's all about intrinsic motivation, not fighting over who gets a medal. For the older students in Key Stages 2 to 4, awards do still exist, but they're carefully structured now. To snag an academic excellence award, a student needs a general average of 90 or higher and absolutely no final grade below 80 anywhere. But here is the real fascinating part. Awardees are going to be listed alphabetically, not by numerical rank. It takes the sting out of that hyper-competition while still celebrating their hard work. Plus, they're adding specific awards to recognize talents in things like leadership, research, and design. So let's quickly recap the huge takeaways here. We are officially saying goodbye to transmutation tables for the older kids. Hello, true transparency. We are guiding and regulating AI usage instead of pretending it doesn't exist. We are protecting our youngest learners by focusing solely on descriptive feedback. And performance tasks, they are now the absolute heaviest hitter in the gradebook. Basically, the whole point of these rules is to make sure a grade actually reflects what a child knows and can do. Which leaves us with one final question. The ink is dry on the policy, the timeline is locked in, and the expectations are clear. So how are you going to adapt your teaching and assessments for the upcoming school year? If you're an educator listening to this, today is the day to start looking at those lesson plans, tweaking those rubrics, and rethinking those daily formative checks. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Here's to a much more transparent, effective, and honestly, learner-centered future in our classrooms.